The obsidian floor of the Grand High Court did not reflect the light. It swallowed it. It was a vast, circular expanse of polished volcanic glass, designed to make anyone standing in its center feel as though they were hovering over a void. Above, the vaulted ceiling arched so high that the bioluminescent moss clinging to the rafters looked like distant, sickly stars. Milton Ward walked across that void. His boots, worn and scuffed from the red dust of the border colonies, made a sharp, rhythmic clack, clack, clack that seemed offensively loud in the cavernous silence. He was the only thing in the room that wasn't draped in silk or armored in ceramite. He wore a utility jacket that had seen better decades, patched at the elbows, and trousers that were more oil-stained than fabric. But the eyes of the 3,000 courtiers, seated in the tiered gallery, were not fixed on his boots. They were fixed on the small, dull circle of metal pinned to his chest. It was a piece of junk. That was the consensus that rippled through the telepathic dampen fields and whispered conversations of the gallery. In a world where the Imperial Archons wore sashes woven from hard light filaments and data streams, Milton's metal looked like something dug out of a combustion engine's exhaust filter. It was pitted gray and utterly lifeless. Milton stopped at the designated marker, a circle of white light that burned cold against his ankles. He looked up. High above him, on a dais that seemed to float on anti-gravitational suspensors, sat Archon Rel. The Archon was a masterpiece of genetic sculpting. His skin was the color of polished marble, his eyes devoid of pupils, just two pools of shifting mercury. Rel did not sit. He lounged, a predator bored with its meal. To the right of the dais stood Leona. She was a junior law scribe currently acting as the ceremonial interpreter. She stood rigid, her hands clasped inside the sleeves of her indigo robes. She was trying very hard to be invisible. She had been assigned to the human a task that was widely considered a career death sentence. Humans were messy. They leaked emotions. They lied poorly. And this Milton Ward, looked like he had walked straight out of a scrap heap. "State your designation," Rel's voice boomed. It didn't come from a speaker. It vibrated directly into the bones of everyone in the room. Milton cleared his throat. The sound was dry, scratchy. "Milton Ward, human, citizen of the Outer Rim territories." "And the artifact," Rel said, a smile curling his thin lips. He gestured with a long, pale finger towards the metal. "We are told you claim this grants you an audience with the throne." "A piece of slag iron." A titter of laughter ran through the gallery. It sounded like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "It is grief steel," Milton said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "It was awarded to my father, Dr. Gideon Ward." The laughter grew louder. It cascaded down the tiers, a waterfall of amusement. "A doctor," Rel chuckled, the sound wet and patronizing. "I have seen the records, human. Your father was a veterinarian. He fixed broken hooves and dewormed livestock on a mudball colony." The Archon leaned forward, his mercury eyes glinting. "You stand in the Hall of Eternal Memory, where we chronicle the history of galaxies, and you bring us a trinket from a man who spent his life waist-deep in manure. You dare demand the Queen's time for the son of a vet." Leona winced. She held her breath, waiting for the human to crumble. She had seen it before. The psychological pressure of the court was designed to crush the ego before the trial even began. She prepared herself to translate his pleas for mercy into the formal high tongue. Milton did not look down. He did not shuffle his feet. He reached up and touched the cold metal of the metal with his thumb. "My dad treated beasts, yes," Milton said. His tone was conversational, as if he were discussing the weather with a neighbor, rather than facing a galactic executioner. He looked directly at Rel. "Some of them just happened to wear crowns." The silence that followed was absolute. Leona felt the blood drain from her face. He did not just say that. Rel froze. The mercury in his eyes stopped shifting. For a second, the sheer audacity of the insult short-circuited his bureaucratic arrogance. Then his face darkened. "Insolence," Rel whispered, and the word hit Milton like a physical blow. "Record that. Add contempt of the High Court to the list of charges." Rel waved a hand, and the air above the center of the court shimmered. The memory scriptorium activated. This was the source of the Empire's power. It was not just a projector. It was a reality editor. Huge ribbons of light unfurled, weaving together to form a three-dimensional scene. It was a recording crisp and high definition. The scene showed a riot in a mining colony. Buildings were burning. Humans were throwing rocks at Imperial peacekeepers. And there, in the center of the chaos, was a figure that looked exactly like Milton. The digital Milton was screaming, holding a rifle, directing the violence. "We have the memories," Rel announced, his voice regaining its smooth, deadly cadence. "We have the testimony of 50 witnesses. You are not here to present a medal, Milton Ward. You are here because you are a terrorist. You incited the insurrection at Sector 7. You caused the death of Imperial citizens." Milton watched the hologram. He watched his digital self shout orders he had never given, holding a gun he had never touched. It was a perfect forgery. The scriptorium didn't just record history. It wrote it. If the Archon wanted you to be a killer, the machine would reach into the minds of witnesses and adjust their recollections until they honestly believed they had seen you pull the trigger. "It is a lie," Milton said. "It is memory," Rel corrected. "And in this Empire, memory is truth." Rel looked down at Leona. "Interpreter, explain to the prisoner the penalty for historical corruption." Leona stepped forward. Her throat felt tight. She looked at Milton. He was watching the hologram with a strange expression, not fear, but a weary sort of recognition. He looked like a man who had seen this magic trick 1,000 times and was just tired of the show. "The penalty," Leona said, her voice wavering slightly before she steadied it, "is erasure. Your biological pattern will be dissolved. Your name will be scrubbed from all databases. It will be as if you never existed." Milton looked at her. For the first time, their eyes met. His eyes were brown, ordinary, and tired. But there was a spark in them, a dry, cynical humor that shouldn't be there. "Efficient," Milton said to her. "Kneel," Rel commanded. "Kneel before the judgment of history." 2 guards materialized from the shadows. They were Praetorians, 7 feet tall, encased in bioarmor that pulsed with a low, threatening hum. They didn't ask. They grabbed Milton by the shoulders. The force was crushing. Milton's knees hit the obsidian floor with a sickening crack. The pain was sharp and white-hot, but he didn't cry out. He bit his tongue, tasting copper. "Confess," Rel demanded. "Admit that your father's medal is a fraud just like your innocence. Admit that humans are nothing but violent animals who need our leash." One of the guards planted a heavy boot on Milton's back, forcing his chest down toward the black stone. The metal was pressed between Milton's sternum and the cold floor. And then the room screamed. It wasn't a vocal scream. It was a feedback loop. A high-pitched whine of audio interference tore through the air, shattering the polite silence of the gallery. The nobles covered their ears. The dull, gray metal on Milton's chest flared. It didn't glow with the clean blue light of Imperial tech. It burned with a dirty orange heat like a dying ember, fanned by a sudden wind. Thump, thump. The sound was amplified 1,000 times. It was a heartbeat. Slow, heavy, struggling. Thump, thump. Archon Rel stood up. "What is this, silencer fields? Activate the dampeners." But the dampeners did not work. The grief steel ignored the laws of their technology. It wasn't broadcasting a signal. It was bleeding a memory. The air in the courtroom twisted. The pristine hologram of the riot flickered and died, replaced by something jagged and raw. The scriptorium tried to reject the foreign data, but the image forced its way through projecting itself onto the vast ceiling. It was shaky, first-person footage. The view of a man running. The camera jerked violently. There was the sound of heavy breathing, Raspy, wet breathing. "Don't look back, Milt, don't look back." The voice was distorted, but Milton squeezed his eyes shut. He knew that voice. The image stabilized for a second. It showed a pair of hands, calloused, scarred hands, holding a small bundle. It wasn't a human child. It was a creature with pale blue scales and 3 eyes bleeding from a shrapnel wound. The background was fire and ash. A clinic sign, half melted, hung askew in the wreckage. "I swore," the voice on the recording gasped. "I swore to do no harm. That doesn't just mean to my own kind." The view spun again as an explosion rocked the memory. The hands shielded the alien creature. Dust and blood splattered the lens of the memory. In the courtroom, the gallery was in chaos. This was raw, unedited memory. It hadn't been scrubbed. It hadn't been color-corrected or narratively aligned by the archons. It was ugly and visceral. "Cut the feed!" Rel screamed, his composure shattering. "That is unauthorized data. That is contamination." Leona stared at the projection. She saw the hands in the memory applying a pressure bandage to the alien creature. She recognized the technique. It was a standard field dressing, but performed with a tenderness that made her chest ache. The memory voice spoke one last time, a whisper that cut through the panic of the court. "Tell the Queen. Tell her the debt is paid." Then static. The metal's light faded. The heartbeat stopped. Milton gasped for air, the pressure on his back vanishing as the guards stepped away, confused by the outburst. He pushed himself up to a sitting position. He wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. The silence now was different. It wasn't the silence of intimidation. It was the silence of shock. "That," Rel stammered, pointing a shaking finger. "That was a fabrication, a trick of human engineering to garner sympathy." Milton slowly got to his feet. His knees screamed in protest, but he stood. He brushed the dust off his jacket. "Grief steel doesn't lie, Archon," Milton said. His voice was steady, hard as iron. "It doesn't edit. It doesn't interpret, it just remembers. That was my father 20 years ago. The day you said he was killed in a drunken bar fight." He took a step forward. The guards raised their weapons, but they hesitated. "Let me tell the story of the metal," Milton said. "Let me tell you what actually happened on the border. If at the end of it you still want to execute me, I will stand still and let you do it. I won't even blink." Rel's face twisted into a sneer. "You think we have time for fairy tales, you?" "Let him speak." The voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it silenced the Archon instantly. At the far end of the hall, the great doors had opened. Standing there, silhouetted against the light of the inner sanctum, was Queen Malus. She was tall, draped in shimmering veils of liquid silver. She did not walk. She seemed to glide. Her face was hidden behind a veil of energy, but her presence filled the room like a sudden change in gravity. She moved past the bowing courtiers, past the stunned guards, and stopped 10 feet from Milton. She did not look at Milton's face. She looked at the metal. The dull, ugly piece of metal. Leona watched the Queen's hands. They were trembling. Just barely. A tremor so slight that only someone trained to watch for the smallest gestures would notice. "Your Majesty," Rel bowed low, his voice dripping with oily reverence. "This is a waste of your time. A terrorist and a charlatan. I was about to pronounce sentence." The Queen did not answer Rel. She didn't even acknowledge his existence. She tilted her head slightly, studying the metal, as if it were a puzzle she had been trying to solve for half a century. "The session," the Queen said, her voice echoing strangely, "is adjourned for the day. The prisoner will be held in the lower spire. We will hear his testimony tomorrow." "But, Your Majesty," Rel protested, stepping forward. "The protocols. The evidence is clear." The Queen turned her head slowly toward Rel. The energy veil flared brighter for a second. "Do not speak to me of evidence, Archon. Not today." She turned back to the void of the room, then walked away, her silver train flowing behind her like a river of mercury. Rel's face was a mask of fury. He glared at Milton with enough hate to burn a hole through the floor. "Get him out of my sight," he hissed at the guards. "Lock him in the dampening cells. And you," he snapped at Leona. "You are responsible for him. If he speaks a word to anyone outside that cell, your memory will be wiped alongside his." Leona swallowed hard. "Yes, Archon." The holding cell in the lower spire was a cube of white light. There were no corners, no shadows, just endless blinding white. It was designed to disorient prisoners, to make them lose track of time and space. Milton sat on the single bench that extruded from the wall. He was rubbing his knee. Leona stood by the energy barrier watching him. She had been standing there for 2 hours. She had expected him to pace, to scream, to demand a lawyer. Instead, he was humming. It was a tune she didn't recognize, something disjointed and upbeat. "You are insane," Leona said finally. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Milton stopped humming. He looked up at her. The harsh white light washed out his features, making him look older. "Probably. It helps." "You provoked the Archon," Leona said, stepping closer to the barrier. "You insulted the High Court. And you brought a piece of forbidden technology into the Hall of Eternal Memory. Do you have a death wish, Milton Ward?" "I have a life wish," Milton corrected. "I'm just very bad at the execution." He winced as he shifted his leg. "Hey, you wouldn't happen to have an aspirin or whatever the space equivalent is? My knee is killing me." Leona stared at him. "You are facing erasure. Your existence is about to be deleted. And you want a painkiller." "Priorities," Milton said. "Can't fight a revolution if you can't walk." Leona deactivated the audio privacy field for a moment, glancing down the corridor to ensure the guards were out of earshot. She looked back at him, her curiosity finally overriding her fear. "That flash," she said quietly. "The memory. The creature your father was holding that was a Valori hatchling, a royal caste." Milton's expression sobered. The dry humor evaporated, leaving something cold and hard underneath. "Yeah, it was. The official history says the Valori were extinct before humans settled the border," Leona whispered. "It says humans hunted them for sport." "Official history says a lot of things," Milton said. "Like how my dad was a drunk, or how I'm a terrorist." "Why did the metal react?" she asked. "Grief steel is passive. It requires a somatic link. It shouldn't project without a connection." Milton tapped his chest. "Maybe it just got angry. Metal has a memory too, Leona. Sometimes it remembers things you want to forget." Leona looked at his hands. They were shaking. Just a little. He was gripping his knee tightly to hide it. "You are terrified," she realized. Milton let out a short, sharp laugh. "Terrified, I'm petrified. I'm standing on a planet that wants to eat me in front of a guy who can rewrite reality with a wave of his hand. I'm about 5 minutes away from a heart attack." "Then why do you joke?" Leona asked. "Why did you mock Rel?" Milton looked at her. His eyes were very clear. "If I stop joking, I start shaking," he said softly. "And if I start shaking, they see I'm just a man. And if they see I'm just a man, they win. I have to be the monster they think I am, or at least the clown they can't understand." Leona looked at him for a long time. She had spent her life studying languages, learning to interpret the nuances of diplomacy and ritual. But she had never heard a language like this. It was a language of survival. "Rel will not let you speak tomorrow," Leona said. "He will find a way to silence you. The trial is a farce." "I know," Milton said. He leaned back against the wall of light. "But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" "He let the Queen see the medal." "The Queen is a figurehead," Leona said dismissively. "The Archons rule. She is just the symbol." "Symbols are powerful," Milton said. "My dad taught me that. Sometimes a symbol is the only thing that can break a system." The door to the corridor hissed open. A guard stepped in, signaling that Leona's shift was over. Time to go, interpreter, the guard grunted. Leona reactivated the privacy field. She looked at Milton one last time. He looked small in the white box, a speck of dust in a sterile machine. I will try to translate accurately tomorrow, she said. It was the only promise she could make. Milton smiled. It was a real smile this time, not a mask. Thanks, Leona. Just don't translate the bad words. I know a few. Leona turned and walked out. As she walked down the long obsidian hallway, the sound of her own footsteps seemed different. They didn't echo as much. She thought about the memory, the hands, the blood. Tell the queen the debt is paid. She stopped at the end of the corridor. She looked back toward the cell block. Rel had said the trial would conclude tomorrow. He had said justice would be served. But as Leona remembered the look in the queen's eyes, that mixture of horror and recognition, she felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the station. Milton's words echoed in her mind. The wrong person is on trial. Leona realized with a jolt that he wasn't talking about himself. He wasn't even talking about Rel. She hurried her pace. She had research to do, and she had a feeling that the history of the Empire was about to get very complicated. The air in the Grand High Court had changed. Yesterday, it had been a vacuum of indifference, a place where a human life was measured in seconds and dismissed with a laugh. Today, the atmosphere was heavy, charged with the static electricity of a storm that refused to break. The courtiers in the gallery were no longer whispering. They were leaning forward, their silken robes rustling like uneasy wind through dry grass. Milton Ward stood in the center of the obsidian floor. He had not slept. The holding cell's white light had ensured that. His eyes were red-rimmed and the stubble on his jaw was darker, grittier. He looked less like a defendant and more like a survivor of a shipwreck who had washed up on a hostile shore, only to be asked to explain the hydrodynamics of the wave that sank him. Archon Rel sat upon his floating dais, his posture rigid. The casual boredom of the previous session was gone. In its place was a predatory alertness. His mercury eyes did not blink. He was a man holding a leash that had suddenly become a snake. Proceed, Rel said. The word was not a permission. It was a threat. Milton touched the metal. It was cold against his chest, a stark contrast to the feverish heat of the memory that was clawing at the back of his mind. The story doesn't start with a gun, Milton began, his voice rasping slightly, before finding its rhythm. It starts with a sign, a wooden sign hanging by one chain, swinging in the dust storms of Colony 4. It read, Gideon Ward, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, all species welcome. Above them, the memory scriptorum hummed. Rel had tried to suppress the visual feed, claiming technical instability, but Queen Malus had overruled him with a single gesture of her hand. Now, the light ribbons wove together, not into the crisp, sanitized propaganda of the Empire, but into something grainy and warm. The courtroom vanished. In its place, the sensory projection flooded the hall. It was hot. The air tasted of iron oxide and ozone. The floor was not obsidian, but stamped metal plating scuffed and stained. The smell hit Leona first, a pungent mix of antiseptic wet fur and something sweet, like rotting fruit. A younger Milton appeared in the projection. He was perhaps 12 years old, skinny, with knees comprised mostly of scabs and dirt. He was sweeping the floor of a clinic that looked more like a mechanic's garage than a medical facility. And there was Gideon. He was a mountain of a man, but he moved with the careful precision of a clockmaker. He wore a stained apron over a thermal undershirt. He was currently wrestling with a creature that looked like a cross between a boar and a tectonic plate, a geodhog native to the mineral belts. The beast was snarling, snapping jaws capable of crushing diamonds. Easy, you big lug, Gideon was saying. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the chest of everyone in the courtroom. If you didn't want a toothache, you shouldn't have tried to eat the mining drill. In the present, Leona watched the projection mesmerized. She had seen humans in the imperial zoos, and she had seen them in the labor camps. They were always portrayed as feral, chaotic, loud. But this man, this Dr. Gideon, was calm. He radiated a profound, unshakable patience. "My father didn't care about politics," Milton narrated, his voice floating over the memory. "He didn't care about the empire or the resistance or the fluctuating price of star fuel. He cared about pain, specifically stopping it." In the memory, the clinic door hissed open. The wind howled outside, carrying the red dust that coated everything. A group of Imperial soldiers stumbled in. They were not on patrol. They were dragging a wounded comrade. Young Milton froze, gripping his broom like a weapon. He hated them. You could see it in the set of his jaw, the flare of his nostrils. These were the occupiers, the ones who taxed their water and rationed their air. "Get him out!" young Milton hissed. Gideon looked up from the geodhog. He wiped his hands on a rag. He saw the soldier, a young conscript, bleeding from a jagged wound in his thigh, where a rock drill had slipped. The boy's armor was white-stained with bright purple blood. He wasn't human. He was a Krell, a species known for their loyalty to the Archons. "Dad, don't," young Milton said. "Let them bleed. They let us starve." In the courtroom, a ripple of shock went through the gallery. A human child, wishing death on an Imperial citizen. It was confirmation of their savagery. But then Gideon spoke. He walked over to the soldiers, ignoring their raised rifles. He knelt by the wounded Krell. "I don't choose who is born what," Gideon said softly, applying a tourniquet with practiced hands. He looked up at his son. "And neither do you, Milt. You don't choose who is born what. You only choose who you become." Leona gasped. The sound was involuntary, sharp enough that the bailiff Thorne glanced at her. Leona brought a hand to her temple. A sudden blinding headache spiked behind her eyes. "You don't choose who is born what." The phrase echoed in her mind, not in Gideon's voice, but in a voice that sounded like wind chimes shattering. It was a fragment of a dream she had suffered for years, a recurring nightmare where she was small, and the sky was burning, and someone was whispering those exact words to her as they hid her in a dark cupboard. "Interpreter," Thorne growled low. "Are you malfunctioning?" "No," Leona whispered, straightening her spine though her hands were trembling. "I am translating. The syntax. It is unusual." She looked at Milton. He wasn't looking at the projection. He was looking at her. He saw it. He saw the recognition. "I hated him for it," Milton continued, his eyes locked on Leona. "I hated that he was soft. I wanted him to be a warrior. I wanted him to pick up a rifle and drive the Empire off our rock. But he just kept stitching up paws and setting bones. He treated the oppressors and the oppressed with the same disinfectant." The memory shifted. The color palette changed from the warm oranges of the afternoon to the bruised purples of twilight. "Then came the night of ash," Milton said. The projection lurched. The camera angle, the memory viewpoint became erratic. It was the perspective of a terrified boy. Sirens were screaming. Not the standard raid sirens, but something deeper, a mechanical roar that vibrated the teeth. "They didn't come to kill us," Milton said, his voice dropping an octave. "Killing creates martyrs. Dead men inspire revolutions. The Empire learned that 1,000 years ago. No, they came to edit us." On the screen, shadows moved through the smoke. They were sleek black drones hovering silently. They emitted pulses of white light. Wherever the light touched, people stopped running. They just stood there, eyes glazing over their expressions, slack. "Mnemosyne drones," Archon Rel interrupted from the dais. "Peacekeeping tools. They pacify violent mobs by temporarily suppressing aggression centers in the brain. Standard protocol." "Is that what you call it?" Milton asked. "Suppression." "We called it hollowing out." In the memory, Gideon burst into the room. He was covered in soot. He grabbed young Milton by the shoulder. "Grab the kit," Gideon barked. The field kit. Now. Dad, the soldiers. Forget the soldiers to the back to the quarantine pens. They ran. The camera shook violently as they sprinted through the narrow corridors of the clinic. The sounds outside were horrifying, because they were not the sounds of battle. There were no screams, just the hum of the drones and the thud of bodies hitting the ground as they were pacified. They reached the quarantine pens at the back of the clinic. This was where Gideon kept the difficult cases, the animals that were too dangerous or too contagious to be near the others. But there were no animals in the pens. Huddled in the straw, shivering in the dark, were 6 children. They were not human. They were not Krell. They were small, pale-skinned, with large violet eyes and vestigial wings, folded against their backs. Leona stopped breathing. She recognized them. They were ethereals, a species that the imperial histories claimed had died out from a genetic plague 300 years ago. A species that was rumored to have natural resistance to telepathic manipulation. "The purification," Milton said to the silent courtroom. That was the order. Sector 7 was not rioting. Sector 7 was hiding refugees. My father wasn't running a vet clinic. He was running an underground railroad for species the Empire wanted erased. Lies. Rel stood up his robes, swirling. This is a fabrication, a digital forgery. "Look at the timestamp," Milton shouted back, pointing at the projection. "Look at the stars in the window. You can fake a video archon, but you can't fake the stellar alignment of a border colony 20 years ago. That is the Veil Nebula in the background. It only looks like that from Sector 7. In the memory, the door to the quarantine bay exploded inward. Imperial shock troopers poured in. They wore the crest of the Red Hand Rel's personal elite guard. Gideon did not have a gun. He did not have a plasma rifle or a vibroblade. He had a cattle prod and a bag of tranquilizer darts intended for a 2-ton megalodon ox. "Get back!" Gideon roared, standing between the soldiers and the alien children. He held the cattle prod like a sword. The soldiers laughed. It was a mechanical, filtered sound. "Target identified," one soldier said. "Sympathizer. Initiate narrative overwrite." They raised their weapons. Not guns, but the neural scribers, heavy cannon-like devices that fired concentrated beams of synaptic disruptors. "Run, Milt!" Gideon screamed. He charged. It was not a graceful fight. It was a desperate, messy brawl. Gideon jammed a tranquilizer syringe into the neck of the first soldier. The man dropped like a stone. He swung the cattle prod, catching another in the sensory array of his helmet, shorting out his optics. Milton's voice over the projection was dry, laced with a bitter affection. "He didn't teach me how to fight. He taught me how to not waste painkillers. He knew exactly where the armor joints were weak. He knew exactly how much ketamine it takes to drop a humanoid of 200 pounds. But there were too many of them. A beam of white light hit Gideon in the chest. He didn't die. He didn't bleed. He just stopped. The cattle prod clattered to the floor. Gideon stood there swaying. His eyes, moments ago full of fire and protective rage, went blank. The light was scrubbing him. It was taking the memory of the children, the memory of the clinic, the memory of his purpose, and burning it out of his neurons. Young Milton screamed a soundless tear in the fabric of the memory and scrambled into a vent shaft, dragging the smallest of the ethereal children with him. The memory view peered through the grate of the vent. The soldiers stood over Gideon. One of them pulled out a data pad. "Subject pacified," the soldier reported. "Upload new narrative. Subject is a drunkard. He fell asleep smoking a death stick. Caused the fire. Killed the livestock. No survivors." The soldier leaned down and whispered into Gideon's ear, utilizing the hypnotic suggestion protocols. "You are tired, Gideon. You are a failure. You drank too much. You dropped the match. It is all your fault. You did this." Gideon's face crumpled. Tears streamed from his blank eyes. He nodded slowly. I did this." Then the soldiers turned their flamethrowers on the clinic. In the courtroom, the silence was absolute. No one breathed. Even the most cynical courtiers were staring horrified. They knew the Empire rewrote history books. They did not know the Empire rewrote people in real time. The projection flickered as the heat in the memory grew intense. The sign, Gideon Ward, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, caught fire. The paint bubbled and peeled the word doctor, turning to ash, leaving only the charred wood beneath. The projection cut out. Milton stood in the center of the court. He was shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the aftershocks of reliving the moment his father was murdered without dying. "They burned the clinic," Milton said quietly. "They took the other children. I never saw them again." By the time the fire crews arrived, the news feeds were already running the story. "Drunken vet burns clinic, kills endangered species." My dad spent the last 10 years of his life believing he was a monster. He drank himself to death trying to drown a guilt that wasn't even his. Enough. Archon Rel's voice was a thunderclap. He was descending from the dais, floating down on his suspensors. His face, twisted in a snarl, that ruined his perfect genetic sculpting. "This is emotional manipulation," Rel addressed the queen who sat motionless on her throne of light. "The human uses a corrupted memory device to slander the Imperial peacekeeping forces. He admits to being the son of a drunkard and a criminal. This entire display is a waste of the court's resources." Rel turned to Milton, towering over him. "You are a liar, Milton Ward. Your father was a disgrace, and you are nothing but a storyteller spinning fantasies to save your own skin." Milton looked up at the Archon. He looked exhausted, depleted, but he reached up and tapped the grief steel metal one more time. "Then ask the metal," Milton whispered. It was there. "The metal is inert," Rel shouted. "It is slag." The metal pulsed, one last time. It didn't project a scene. It projected a feeling. A wave of pure, unadulterated emotion washed over the courtroom. It was the sensation of rough hands gripping small shoulders. A brief image flashed a snippet of memory from the moment Gideon was being dragged out of the burning building by the soldiers. Gideon, half mind-wiped, confused, stumbling. He looked back toward the vent where Milton was hiding. He couldn't have known Milton was there. The logic of the situation said he couldn't see him. But in the memory, Gideon looked right at the vent. And he smiled. It was a broken, sad, terrifying smile. But it was a smile. "It's okay," Gideon mouthed. "Stay hidden. Be who you become." Then the soldiers struck him with a rifle butt, and the image went black. Milton let his hand drop from the metal. "He fought the overwrite," Milton said. "For 1 second. Just long enough to tell me to live." Leona felt a tear slide down her cheek. She touched it surprised. She never cried. Interpreters were not allowed to cry. It interfered with the vocal cords. She looked at Rel. The Archon was standing very still. He wasn't looking at Milton. He was looking at the gallery, trying to gauge the damage. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the nobles. He saw the horror. "The scriptorum," Leona said. Her voice was small, but in the silence it carried. Rel whipped his head around. "Silence, interpreter." "The scriptorum," Leona repeated louder this time. She stepped out from her designated circle. "It uses the same frequency as the weapons in the memory. The white light. The hum. It is the same technology." "You are dismissed, junior scribe," Rel roared. "Guards, remove her." "Wait!" Queen Mela stood up. The motion was simple, but it stopped the guards in their tracks. The queen descended the steps of her throne. She did not float. She walked. Her feet touched the ground with deliberate heavy steps. She walked past Rel. She ignored him completely. She stopped in front of Milton. The queen was 7 feet tall, an imposing figure of silver and light. She looked down at the human. "Your father," the queen said. Her voice was not the melodious, artificial voice of the court. It sounded old. It sounded tired. "He saved ethereals." "Yes," Milton said. "And he kept a promise." "Until they burned it out of him," Milton replied. The queen turned slowly to face Archon Rel. For the first time in the history of the current reign, the Queen's eyes were visible through her energy veil. They were violet. She did not look at Rel with anger. She looked at him with something far worse. She looked at him with suspicion. "Archon," the Queen said, "you told me the ethereals were lost to the plague. You told me the memory scriptorium was a tool for preservation, not alteration." Rel bowed, but the sweat was glistening on his marble skin. "Your Majesty, surely you do not believe the hallucinations of a primitive object. The human is desperate. He is twisting facts." "We will see," the Queen said. "The trial continues." "Your Majesty." "The trial continues," her voice cracked the air like a whip. "And the interpreter remains. She seems to be the only one here interested in the translation of truth." Rel straightened. He adjusted his robes. He looked at Milton, and the hatred in his eyes was now mixed with genuine fear. He had expected a lamb. He had found a wolf in a shepherd's coat. "As you wish," Rel said, his voice tight. "But be warned, human. Memory is a two-way street. If you open the door to the past, you may not like what walks through it." Milton smiled. It was the same dry, reckless smile he had worn since he walked in. "I don't have to like it, Rel," Milton said. "I just have to make sure you can't erase it." The Queen signaled the end of the session. As the courtiers filed out buzzing with the scandal, Leona found herself walking beside Milton as the guards escorted him back to the lower spire. "You knew," Leona whispered. "You knew the Queen would react to the ethereals." "I took a gamble," Milton admitted. "Dad always said the Queen had a soft spot for lost causes." "That wasn't a soft spot," Leona said, glancing at the retreating figure of the monarch. "That was recognition." She looked at Milton. "Who were those children, Milton? Really?" Milton looked straight ahead. "That's part 3, Leona. Let's just say my dad didn't just treat beasts that wore crowns. Sometimes he treated the crowns before they were beasts. They reached the cell block. Before the energy barrier slid shut, Milton turned to her. "Hey," he said. "Thanks for the backup. I thought you were going to let me hang out to dry." Leona looked at her hands. They were still trembling slightly. She thought of the nightmare, the cupboard, the voice whispering, "You don't choose who is born what." "I didn't do it for you," Leona said, her voice shaking. "I did it because I think I know that clinic. I think I've smelled that smoke before." Milton's expression softened. He looked at her with a profound sadness. "I know," he said softly. "Why do you think I asked for you as my interpreter?" The barrier slammed shut, separating them. Leona stood there for a long time, staring at the white light, feeling the foundations of her world crumbling one brick of memory at a time. The great library of the High Court was a mausoleum of silence. It was here, amidst the towering crystalline spires that stored the Empire's legal precedents, that Leona sat preparing for the third day of the trial. Her hands, usually steady, as stone, were trembling over the holographic interface of her translation console. She had been given specific instructions by Archon Rel's seneschal just an hour ago: translate the words interpreter, not the meaning. If he speaks of freedom, you translate it as chaos. If he speaks of truth, you translate it as instability. Do not fail us again. It was a standard instruction. She had heard it 1,000 times. But today, the words tasted like ash in her mouth. Leona looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the console. Her violet eyes, usually so sharp and detached, looked haunted. Since the projection of the burning clinic, the gaps in her own memory felt less like empty rooms and more like fresh wounds. She kept smelling smoke that wasn't there. She kept hearing a voice, Gideon's voice, telling her she didn't choose who she was born. She activated the archive search. She wasn't supposed to. Her clearance level was strictly for linguistic databases, but she had overridden the protocols using a syntax loop she had discovered years ago. She typed in a query: Sector 7, Night of Ash, Survivor Manifest. The system thought for a moment, then blinked red. Access denied. Archon level seal. She tried again. Grief steal. Resonance frequency. Access denied. She slammed her fist onto the console. The holographic keys shimmered and distorted. Trouble in paradise. Interpreter. Leona spun around. Standing in the doorway of her private alcove, flanked by two guards who looked bored, was Milton Ward. He was shackled, but he leaned against the doorframe with that infuriatingly casual slouch. "How are you here?" Leona hissed, glancing at the guards. "Your boss wanted me to see the evidence against me before the session starts," Milton said, stepping into the room. The guards stayed outside. Procedural fairness, apparently. Or maybe he just wanted to intimidate me with the sheer volume of fake paperwork. He walked over to the console, his chains clinking softly. He looked at the red access denied screen. "You're not going to find anything," he said quietly. "Rel cleans up his messes." "I am not looking for anything," Leona lied, clearing the screen. "I am preparing my lexicon." "You're looking for yourself," Milton said. It wasn't a question. Leona froze. She looked up at him. "What did you mean yesterday when you said you asked for me?" Milton sighed. He sat on the edge of her desk, ignoring the breach of protocol. "You really don't remember, do you? You don't remember the smell of antiseptic, the way the wind sounded, rattling the clinic roof?" "Stop it," Leona whispered. "Do not try to manipulate me with your psychological games." "It's not a game, Leona. It's a flashback." The room seemed to spin. The flashback hit them both, not from the metal this time, but from the sheer weight of the narrative unfolding between them. 7 years ago, the Undercity of Core Prime. The memory played out in Milton's mind, and he narrated it with a voice that was weary of secrets. Milton was 25, then harder, angrier. He had spent years tracking the source of the peacekeeping orders that had destroyed his home. He had partnered with Asha Klein, a human engineer, who could talk to machines better than she could talk to people. "We found the pattern," Milton told Leona, his voice low. "Every raid, every accidental fire, every sudden plague on a border world, they all had the same digital signature. It wasn't military, it was bureaucratic. A specific office in the Palace of Memories." The flashback sharpened. Milton and Asha were in a ventilation shaft looking down into a vast cold room filled with glowing blue pillars, memory jars. This was a processing center where memories were harvested from political prisoners before they were sent to the mines. "We were there to steal a drive," Milton said. "Proof that the Archon was manufacturing consent. But we ran into a snag." The snag was Leona. In the memory, she was younger, her robes crisp, her face unlined by doubt. She was performing a sealing ritual on a jar. She was chanting, her hands weaving complex patterns of light to lock the memory away forever. Milton had dropped from the vent, pistol raised. Leona had spun around a stylus in her hand that hummed with lethal voltage. "Don't move," Milton had growled. "You are trespassing on sacred ground, human," Leona had replied, her voice ice cold. "Surrender, and your death will be swift." "I'm not here for a fight. I'm here for the truth. Truth is what the Archon decrees." They had circled each other, a deadly dance in the blue light. Milton was raw instinct. Leona was trained precision. It would have ended with one of them dead, if not for the noise. A small whimpering sound from the corner. They both froze. Behind a stack of crates, a child was huddled. Not a human. A young Valori, barely a toddler, shivering in the cold. The child had been tagged for processing. Milton lowered his gun. Leona lowered her stylus. "That's a kid," Milton said. "It is a contraband subject," Leona corrected, though her hand wavered. "It's a kid," Milton repeated. "And if you seal that jar, you wipe its mind. It won't even know how to feed itself." Leona looked at the child. Then she looked at the imperial seal on the jar. It was a standard form, subject dangerous, erase identity. The child looked up at Leona. It had the same violet eyes. "That was the moment," Milton said in the library, watching Leona's face. The moment the crack appeared. In the flashback, Leona didn't attack Milton. She didn't sound the alarm. She walked over to the console and keyed in a sequence. Error in processing, she had announced loudly to the empty room. Subject unsuitable for storage. Discarding to lower levels. She opened the service chute. She looked at Milton. "Take it, and go, before I remember my duty." Milton had grabbed the child. He paused at the chute. "Why?" "Because," Leona had whispered, looking terrified of her own words. "The protocol says to erase enemies. It does not say to erase innocence." Back in the library, Leona gripped the edge of the console until her knuckles turned white. "That was you," she whispered. "The intruder. The one they said was a Shadow Guild assassin." "And that was you," Milton replied. "The junior scribe who falsified a record to save a life. You think you're a cog in the machine, Leona, but you've been jamming the gears for years. You just forgot." "Why did I forget?" Leona asked, her voice trembling. "If I did that, why don't I remember it clearly?" "Because Rel found out," Milton said grimly. "Not about the kid, maybe. But he sensed you were drifting, so he adjusted you. Why do you think you have those migraines? Why do you think you dream of smoke?" Leona stared at him. The pieces were falling into place, jagged and painful. The gaps in her memory weren't accidents. They were surgical scars. "You are dangerous, Milton Ward," she said softly. "You bring chaos." "I bring the bill," Milton corrected. "And it's past due." He leaned in closer. "I didn't come here to kill the Queen Leona. I know she's not the one pulling the strings. I came here to force Rel into the light. But I can't do it alone. I need the interpreter to stop translating the lies and start translating the silence." The guards banged on the door. "Time is up. To the courtroom." Milton stood up. He looked at her one last time. "Don't translate what I say today, Leona. Translate what they're hiding." The Grand High Court was packed to capacity. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and expensive perfume. Archon Rel was back on his dais, but he looked less like a judge and more like a general on a battlefield. He had reinforced the perimeter with his own red-hand guards. Queen Malus sat on her throne, silent, watchful. Her energy veil was dimmed, allowing her to see clearly. "The session resumes," Rel announced. "We will now hear the testimony regarding the accused's character. Bring in the witness." The doors opened. A woman walked in. Milton stiffened. It was Asha Klein. But it wasn't the Asha he knew. She walked with a stiff, mechanical gait. Her eyes were glazed, staring at nothing. She wore the gray uniform of a penal colonist. "State your name," Rel commanded. "Prisoner 789. Formerly Asha Klein," she recited. Her voice was flat, devoid of the sharp wit and sarcasm Milton loved. "Do you know the accused?" "Yes, he is Milton Ward, leader of the terrorist cell, Red Dawn," the crowd murmured. Milton felt a cold knot in his stomach. They had gotten to her. They had scrubbed her. "Tell the court what Milton Ward planned," Rel said, leaning forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Asha stared straight ahead. "He planned to detonate a gravitational bomb in the royal palace. He wanted to kill the queen. He told me that humans are the only masters of the stars." "Lies," Milton shouted. "Asha, look at me, it's Milt." "Silence the prisoner," Rel roared. A guard struck Milton in the stomach with a stun baton. He doubled over, gasping. "Continue," Rel ordered. Leona stood at her podium. She was listening to Asha's words, but she was also watching the biometric readings on her console. The scriptorum was active. It was feeding lines directly into Asha's neural cortex. Leona saw the syntax pattern. It was the High Imperial dialect, formal, rigid, structured. Asha was a street kid from the orbital slums. She didn't speak High Imperial. She spoke in slang and contractions in messy human loops. He said that the empire must fall, Asha droned on. He said that one cannot make an omelet without breaking the eggs. Leona froze. That was an idiom. A specifically human idiom. But in High Imperial, the structure was wrong. The grammar Rel was feeding her translated literally to, "It is impossible to construct a spherical protein casing without structural damage to the embryo." It was a clumsy translation. A machine translation. Leona looked at Rel. He was so confident in his technology, so sure, that no one would notice the linguistic seams. She looked at Milton. He was on his knees looking at Asha with heartbreak written all over his face. He wasn't worried about the trial anymore. He was mourning his friend. Leona made a choice. She activated her microphone. "Translation correction," she announced. Her voice rang out clear and bell-like across the hall. Rel's head snapped toward her. "Interpreter, do not interrupt the witness." "The witness is using a dialectical inconsistency," Leona said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The phrase omelet implies a culinary context. However, the syntax she is using corresponds to the Rel code encrypted military channel." The courtroom went deadly silent. "What did you say?" Rel whispered. "I said," Leona continued, her voice gaining strength, "that the witness is not speaking from memory. She is reciting a script, and the script has a grammatical error that only appears in the Archon's personal dictation software." She tapped her console. "I am projecting the linguistic analysis." A hologram sprang up in the center of the room. It showed Asha's speech pattern, overlaid with a text stream originating from Rel's podium. They matched perfectly, down to the microsecond delay. "She is not confessing," Leona said, looking directly at the Queen. "She is being ventriloquized." The Queen stood up. "Is this true?" Rel's face turned purple. "This is treason. The interpreter is conspiring with the human. She is twisting the data." "I am translating the data," Leona shot back. "Accurately. For the first time." Asha blinked. The interruption in the data stream caused her programming to stutter. She looked around, confused. Her eyes focused on Milton. "Milt," she whispered. Her voice was small, but it was her voice. "Why am I wearing gray?" "It's okay, Ash," Milton choked out. "Just breathe." Rel slammed his hand down on his control panel. "Enough of this farce. The prisoner is guilty. The interpreter is compromised. Guards, seize them both." The Red Hand guards moved. They were fast. 4 of them rushed the podium where Leona stood. "Run!" Milton yelled, lunging forward. He caught the first guard with his shoulder, knocking him off balance. Despite his shackles, Milton moved with the desperate speed of a man protecting his own. Leona didn't run. She stood her ground. She typed furiously into her console. "I am logging this session into the public domain," she shouted. "If you arrest me, the linguistic proof goes to every news node in the sector." "Jam the transmission!" Rel shrieked. Chaos erupted. The nobles were screaming, fleeing the gallery. The Queen's personal guards, the Silver Legion, stepped forward to intercept Rel's Red Hand, but they were outnumbered in the hall. A guard grabbed Leona by the hair, dragging her away from the console. She cried out, dropping her data slate. Milton, ignoring the stun batons, raining down on his back, threw himself across the floor. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for Leona. He grabbed the guard's ankle and twisted. It was a dirty street-fighting move. The guard went down hard. Milton scrambled up and pulled Leona behind him. He stood between her and the advancing soldiers, his chains swinging like a flail. "You picked the wrong side, interpreter," Rel sneered from the safety of his dais. "You could have lived a long, quiet life. Now you will be erased." Leona looked at Milton's back. His jacket was torn, his skin bruised. He was outnumbered 20-1, but he wasn't shaking. He looked back at her over his shoulder. He grinned. It was bloodied, manic, and absolutely terrifying. "Hey," he panted. "You okay?" "I am statistically unlikely to survive," Leona stammered. Good, Milton said. That means we have a chance. He turned back to Rel. You hear that, Archon? She's not translating your lies anymore. She's editing your script. Rel pointed a shaking finger at them. Kill them. Kill them both. Right now. The guards raised their neural scribers. The white light began to build in the barrels. Get down! Milton roared, tackling Leona. But the shot didn't come. A high-pitched hum filled the room. Not a weapon. A resonance. The grief steel metal on Milton's chest was glowing again. But this time it wasn't just glowing. It was singing. It was reacting to Leona, to her fear, to her courage, to the sudden violent breaking of the mental dams that Rel had built in her mind. The metal didn't project a picture this time. It projected a shockwave. Boom. The psychic blast knocked the guards off their feet. It shattered the glass of the translation booth. It cracked the obsidian floor. Rel's dais wobbled. In the center of the dust and debris, Milton and Leona lay on the floor. Milton groaned, pushing a piece of rubble off his leg. Leona sat up. Her eyes were wide. The headache was gone. The fog was gone. She looked at Milton, and for the first time, she didn't see a human. She didn't see a lower life form. She saw the man who had pulled a child from a chute 7 years ago. She saw the boy who had watched his father burn, and she felt something warm in her chest. It wasn't logic. It wasn't protocol. It was gratitude. And something else. Something dangerous. You saved me, she whispered. Reflex, Milton grunted, trying to stand. Bad habit. Rel was screaming orders, but the confusion was total. The Queen's Silver Legion had used the distraction to secure the exits. The courtroom was now a standoff. Archon Rel. The Queen's voice cut through the noise. She was standing on her throne, radiating power. Stand down. The trial is now under martial law. Rel looked at the Queen, then at Milton and Leona. He realized he had lost control of the narrative. He sneered. Martial law, Rel spat. You have no power here, Malus. The memory scriptorium controls the fleet, and I control the scriptorium. He pressed a button on his wrist. Protocol 0, he said. Purge the hall. The walls of the courtroom began to shift. The exits sealed. The air vents closed. A green gas and neural toxin designed to erase short-term memory began to hiss from the ceiling. He's going to wipe the whole room, Asha screamed from the witness stand. He's going to make us all forget this ever happened. Milton looked at Leona. Can you open the doors? No, Leona said, her mind racing. But I can open something else. What? The scriptorium core, she said. If we can get to the central server room, I can override his command. I can use the translation protocols to rewrite the purge command into a lullaby. A lullaby? Milton blinked. Metaphorically, Leona snapped. I can shut it down. Where is the core? Through the King's Walk, Leona pointed to a hidden archway behind the throne. But it is guarded by the statues. Statues? Milton asked. Combat golems, Leona clarified. Ancient ones, Milton laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of sound. Of course, stone monsters. Why not? He offered her a hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and warm. Ready to break some laws, interpreter, Leona looked at his hand. She looked at the green gas descending from the ceiling. She looked at Rel, who was watching them with gloating triumph. She took Milton's hand. I am done with laws, Leona said. I am ready for edits. Milton pulled her to her feet. He looked at Rel one last time. Finally, Milton said, his eyes hard as diamonds. Now it's honest. They turned and ran toward the archway, diving into the shadows, just as the green gas touched the floor where they had stood. The chase was on. And for the first time in 100 years, the Empire's history was being written by the people running for their lives, not the ones sitting on the thrones. The King's Walk was not designed for the living. It was a mausoleum of history, a corridor of silence, stretching 300 yards beneath the imperial palace, lined with the statues of the dead monarchs. Each statue was carved from weeping stone, standing 30 feet tall, their stone eyes fixed eternally on the center of the path where Milton Ward and Leona were currently sprinting. The green neural toxin gas was hissing behind them, a rolling fog of erasure that clawed at their heels. The heavy blast doors of the courtroom had sealed, but Leona had known the override code for the service hatch, a code she wasn't supposed to know, a code that had bubbled up from the same suppressed place in her mind as the smell of smoke. "They are tracking us!" Leona shouted. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. The heavy ceremonial robes she wore were not made for running. She had hitched them up to her knees, revealing boots that clicked frantically against the stone floor. "Let them track," Milton wheezed, limping slightly on his bad knee. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping him upright. "We just need to get to the core." Ahead of them, the shadows shifted. The statue of King Auric the Conqueror, a monolith of granite, holding a stone warhammer, groaned. Dust rained down from its shoulders. The sound of grinding stone echoed through the corridor, like the earth itself was splitting open. "The statues," Milton said, skidding to a halt. "Leona, tell me those are just animatronics." "They are golems," Leona said, her face pale. "Defense constructs, powered by the ambient psychic field of the palace. Rel has activated the sanctum protocols." The stone head of the king turned. The eyes, previously dead stone, flared with a hostile red light. The warhammer lifted, scraping against the vaulted ceiling, preparing to crush the intruders into paste. Behind them, the gas. Ahead of them, a walking mountain. "Do you have a gun?" Leona asked. "I have a medal and a bad attitude," Milton replied, backing up. "You're the one with the magic words. Do something." Leona stared at the golem. Her mind raced through the thousands of hours of ritual training she had endured. The high priests had taught her the prayers of veneration. They had told her these words were to honor the spirits of the ancestors. But as she looked at the red eyes of the machine, she realized the lie. The Empire didn't believe in spirits. It believed in code. The prayers were not requests. They were command syntax. She stepped forward, placing herself between Milton and the descending hammer. "Stop!" Milton grabbed for her arm, but she shook him off. Leona raised her hands, palms out, fingers splayed in a specific geometric pattern. She didn't scream. She projected her voice with the resonance of a choir. "Protocol Ethelgard. Subroutine Mercy. Identify Authority Scribe Level 1. The hammer paused mid-swing. The air hummed with the tension of the massive servos locking up. "Authority Invalid," a voice boomed from the statue's chest, a grinding tectonic voice. "Intruder detected. Terminate." The hammer began to fall again. "Try something else," Milton yelled, diving to push her out of the way. Leona didn't move. She closed her eyes. She stopped thinking like a scribe who obeyed Rel. She started thinking like the girl who had saved a child in a freezing ventilation shaft. She reached for a deeper syntax, a forbidden dialect she had seen once in a corrupted file. "Override command, blood of the covenant," Leona screamed. "The guest is under the protection of the crown." The hammer stopped inches from her nose. The wind of its motion blew her hair back. The red light in the golem's eyes flickered, then turned a soft, dormant blue. The statue slowly lowered its arm and stepped back, returning to its pedestal. It froze, becoming stone once more. Milton picked himself up from the floor. He stared at the statue, then at Leona. "Protection of the crown," he asked, breathless. "I thought I was a terrorist." Leona lowered her hands. They were shaking violently. "The ritual is old code, from before Rel, from a time when the laws of hospitality meant something." She looked at Milton, her eyes wide with the shock of her own power. "I just hacked a 3,000-year-old murder machine with a poem." "Remind me never to interrupt you when you're reading," Milton said. He grabbed her hand. "Come on, before the next king decides he hates poetry." They ran past the line of silent giants, bursting through the far doors, just as the green gas filled the corridor behind them. They emerged into a world that made no sense. One moment, they were in a stone tomb. The next, they were floating. They had entered the hanging gardens of the inner sanctum. It was a sphere of zero-gravity containment, a bubble of atmosphere suspended in the center of the palace towers. Bioluminescent vines drifted in the air like lazy green snakes. Orbs of water the size of houses floated serenely filled with swimming fish that shimmered like neon signs. "Grab something!" Milton yelled as his feet left the floor. He flailed, grabbing a thick vine. Leona drifted past him, spinning slowly. She looked graceful, even in her panic, her robes fanning out like the petals of a violet flower. "The gravity generator is inverted here," Leona gasped, grabbing a floating branch of crystal wood. "It is designed for the Queen's meditation, to relieve the weight of the crown." "Well, it's relieving the weight of my lunch," Milton muttered. He kicked off the vine, propelling himself toward a floating pathway of stone slabs. "Which way to the core?" "Down," Leona pointed. "Or whatever direction the center is." They navigated the garden like swimmers in a coral reef. They pushed off statues, vaulted over floating fountains, and scrambled along the underside of bridges. Suddenly, a laser blast sizzled past Milton's ear, vaporizing a floating orchid. "Contact!" Milton shouted, twisting in midair to hide behind a water orb. 3 Imperial drones hovered at the entrance they had just come through. They were sleek silver discs with single red eyes, scanning the garden. "Targets acquired!" the drones chirped in unison. "Go!" Milton shoved Leona toward the central shaft. "I'll draw their fire!" "You have no weapon," Leona argued, gripping his sleeve. "I'm human." Milton grinned, though his eyes were tight with fear. "We're annoying. It's a tactical advantage." He kicked off the stone slab, launching himself into the open space, waving his arms. "Hey, tin cans over here!" The drones swiveled toward him. Milton grabbed a handful of loose gravel from a floating planter and hurled it. In zero gravity, the stones flew like bullets. They didn't damage the drones, but the sensors tracked the multiple projectiles, confusing their targeting algorithms for a split second. Milton used that second to dive through a sphere of water. The liquid slowed the laser blasts that followed him, turning the deadly beams into harmless steam. Leona watched him. He was clumsy, reckless, and completely uncoordinated compared to the grace of her people. But he was effective. He turned chaos into a shield. "You humans always improvise," she yelled, launching herself toward the exit hatch. Milton surfaced from the water orb, gasping, hair plastered to his face. "No!" he shouted back, pushing off a statue to dodge another volley. "Only when your laws try to eat me." A sudden burst of static erupted in the garden's speaker system. Leona, can you hear me?" It was Asha. Her voice was strained, fighting through layers of digital encryption. "Asha!" Milton yelled. "Where are you?" "I'm in the ventilation grid," Asha's voice crackled. I shook off the loop. That linguistic trick Leona pulled it woke me up. "Listen, I'm jamming the drone frequencies, but I can't hold them long. The scriptorum core is directly below you, Sector 4. But Milt, the energy readings are spiking. Something is calling out." "It's the metal," Milton said, looking down at his chest. The grief steel was no longer dull. It was white-hot. It was vibrating so hard, Milton's teeth rattled. It wasn't just reacting to danger anymore. It was pulling him. It was a magnet, and the core was true north. "Get to the hatch!" Asha screamed. "I'm cutting the gravity now!" The hum of the anti-grav generators died. Gravity returned with a vengeance. Milton and Leona fell. They dropped 20 feet, crashing onto the soft, mossy floor of the lower level. The drones, caught off guard by the sudden physics shift, smashed into the floor, their delicate stabilizers shattering. Milton groaned, rolling onto his back. "Remind me to give Asha a raise, and then fire her." Leona was already up. She pointed to a massive circular door made of pure obsidian. It was pulsed with blue veins of light. "The scriptorium," she whispered. The interior of the memory scriptorium was cold. It was a cathedral of data. Rows upon rows of crystalline pillars stretched into the darkness, each one containing the captured memories of 1,000,000 souls. The air whispered. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000 recorded voices, talking at once, a low, ghostly murmur that made the skin crawl. They walked down the central aisle. The grief steel metal was shining like a flashlight, now cutting through the gloom. "We need the main terminal," Leona whispered. "I can reverse the purge from there." They reached the center. A massive console sat beneath a floating spire of light, the master memory drive. Leona's fingers flew across the interface. "Rel has locked the system, but he used the standard Imperial cipher. He is so arrogant he didn't think anyone would dare break in." She worked fast, bypassing firewalls, rerouting logic gates. Milton stood guard, watching the shadows. But the metal was burning his chest. It was pulling him toward a specific pillar near the console. A pillar that was black, not blue. "Leona," Milton said, his voice strange. "What is that?" Leona looked up. She saw the black pillar, her face drained of blood. "That is a void jar," she said. "It is for sealed incidents, things the Empire wants to delete from existence, not just archive." Milton walked toward it. The metal was screaming now, a high-pitched resonance that only he could feel. "It wants this one," Milton said. Leona stepped away from the console. She walked toward the black pillar. She didn't know why, but her legs felt like lead. She felt the headache returning, the smell of smoke, the sound of the wind. The pillar had a name etched into the glass. Subject Leona Vane. Incident Sector 7 Reclamation. Status Witness. Purged. Leona stopped. She stared at her name. "Sector 7, she whispered. "That's where your father's clinic was." "Yes," Milton said softly. "I was there," Leona said, her voice trembling. "Why was I there? I was a child. I lived on the core worlds." She reached out and touched the black glass. The memory didn't need the machine to play. The touch was enough. The barrier in her mind weakened by the metal's presence, shattered. Flashback. She was 10 years old. She was on a school trip, a diplomatic tour of the border colonies meant to show the high caste children the benevolence of the Empire. The shuttle had malfunctioned. They had made an emergency landing in Sector 7. She had wandered away from the group. She was curious. She had found a clinic with a sign that said, "All species welcome." She had seen the man Gideon feeding a creature that looked like a dragon. He had smiled at her. He hadn't bowed. He had offered her a sweet root candy. Then the soldiers came. She had hidden in the cupboard. She had watched through the slats. She saw Rel, younger then, just a commander, step into the room. She saw Rel give the order, not to arrest Gideon, but to cleanse the narrative. She saw Gideon fighting. She saw the fire. And then she saw Rel open the cupboard. He had looked at her, a high-caste child witnessing a massacre. "A pity," Rel had said, smoothing her hair with a bloody glove. "You have such bright eyes. We will have to dim them a little." He had placed the device on her forehead. The white light, the cold, the erasing, end flashback. Leona pulled her hand back as if the glass were red hot. She fell to her knees, gasping for air. The tears that streamed down her face were not polite, silent tears. They were ugly, racking sobs of a stolen childhood returned. "He took it," Leona choked out. "He took my mind. He made me watch, and then he made me forget so I could serve him." Milton knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. He just waited, being a solid presence in her crumbling world. "He killed your father," Leona looked at Milton, her violet eyes burning with a new, terrifying fire. "And he turned me into the tool that hid the body." "Leona," Milton said gently. "I am going to kill him," she whispered. She stood up. The trembling was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline rage. "I am going to open his mind and delete everything he is." "No," a voice said from the shadows. Archon Rel stepped out from behind the master drive. He was not alone. 2 Praetorian guards flanked him, weapons raised. But Rel looked unbothered. He looked amused. "A touching reunion," Rel said, clapping his hands slowly. "The orphan and the ghost. I should have been more thorough with the edit, Leona. You were always a glitchy asset." Leona lunged. It wasn't a tactical move. It was pure hate. "Leona, wait!" Milton shouted. But she was fast. She pulled a data spike from her sleeve, aiming for Rel's neck. Rel didn't even flinch. He raised a hand and a wave of kinetic force, an implanted gravity amp slammed Leona backward. She hit the console hard and slid to the floor dazed. Milton stepped in front of her. He faced Rel. "End of the line, Milton," Rel said, drawing a sleek, golden pistol. "No witnesses this time. I'll write the story myself. The terrorist killed the brave interpreter and was heroically put down by the Archon. It has a nice ring to it." Milton looked at the gun. Then he looked at Rel's eyes. He could rush him. The distance was short. Milton had a vibrocutter in his pocket, a tool, not a weapon, but it would work. He could jam it into Rel's throat before the Archon pulled the trigger. He felt the urge rising in him hot and bloody. This was the man. This was the architect of his pain. "Kill him!" the voice in his head screamed. "Avenge Gideon! Avenge the clinic!" Milton's hand tightened on the cutter in his pocket. Then he heard a sound, a heartbeat, thump-thump. The metal. He remembered the memory. Gideon, smiling back at the vent. "You don't choose who is born what. You only choose who you become." If he killed Rel, now in the dark, with a knife, he was just another thug in a universe of thugs. Rel would become a martyr. The system would survive. Milton let go of the cutter. "You're right, Rel," Milton said, raising his empty hands. "It's a great story, but you're telling it to the wrong audience." Rel frowned. "What?" "Leona," Milton yelled. The console broadcast. Leona, shaking off the concussion, slammed her hand onto the enter key she had prepped earlier. The speakers in the scriptorium, and the speakers in the Great Hall, and the speakers in the plaza outside screeched to life. "People of the Empire!" Milton's voice boomed, amplified 1,000 times. "The Archon wants to write a tragedy, but we prefer a courtroom drama," Rel fired. The golden beam scorched the air where Milton's head had been a second ago. "Run!" Milton grabbed Leona, and they sprinted not away from the danger, but toward the service elevator behind the console. "Where are we going?" Leona screamed, as the doors hissed shut, blocking Rel's second shot. "Up!" Milton panted, slamming the button for the high court level. "We're going back. Back to the kill zone." "No," Milton said, wiping blood from his forehead. "To the stage. Rel wants to hide in the dark, so we're going to drag him under the biggest spotlight in the galaxy." The doors to the Grand High Court blew open. They didn't blow open with explosives. They opened because Asha Klein, back in the ventilation shaft, had hardwired the door mechanism to the ceremonial welcome protocol. Milton and Leona stumbled onto the obsidian floor. They were covered in dust, soot, and blood. They looked like wrecks. The court was in chaos. The gas had cleared, vented by Leona's earlier hack. The nobles were huddled in the corners. The Queen's Silver Legion had their weapons trained on Rel's Red Hand Guards, a tense Mexican standoff. Queen Melis sat on her throne. She looked calm, almost too calm. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a train that was 20 years late. Rel burst in behind them, flanked by his Praetorians. "Execute them!" Rel screamed, losing all pretense of control. "They are armed. They are assassins." "Hold!" The Queen's voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a collapsing star. The Silver Legion stepped forward, forming a wall between Rel and the pair. "This session was adjourned," Rel snarled, his eyes darting around the room. "I reopened it," Queen Melis said. She stood up. "The human says he has a story. I want to hear the ending." He is a liar, Rel pointed at Milton. He has corrupted the interpreter. He has sabotaged the palace. Milton stepped forward. He walked to the center of the room, to the exact spot where he had knelt on the first day. He's right, Milton said, his voice raspy but steady. I am a saboteur. I broke your statues. I flooded your garden. I trespassed in your library. He looked at Rel. But I didn't erase her. Milton pointed at Leona. The court turned to look at Leona. She stood tall, her robes torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. But her eyes were clear. I am Leona Vane, she said, her voice ringing out. I am a witness of Sector 7, and I accuse Archon Rel of high treason against the truth. The gasp from the gallery sucked the air out of the room. Proof, Rel shouted, sweat pouring down his marble face. You have no proof, just the ravings of a broken mind. Proof, Milton asked. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out the grief steel medal. It was cooling now, returning to its dull gray color. He didn't hand it to Leona. He didn't hand it to the queen. He walked up to the stone table of judgment, the sacred slab where laws were signed. He slammed the medal down onto the stone. Clang. The sound was small, but it echoed like a gunshot. Your court wants a story, Rel, Milton said, staring the Archon down. This one bites. That medal is garbage, Rel yelled. It is inert without a somatic link. Is it? Milton asked. Or is it just waiting for the right hand? He looked at the queen. Your Majesty, Milton said. My father told me this medal wasn't just an award. He said it was a key. He said he locked it the day he saved those children, and he swore only one person could open it. Who? The queen whispered, descending the steps. The person who gave it to him, Milton said. Rel's eyes widened. He lunged forward. Stop her. Don't let her touch it. But the Silver Legion held the line. Queen Malis walked to the table. She looked at the cheap, battered piece of steel. Her hand trembled. She wasn't looking at it like a queen looking at evidence. She was looking at it like a woman looking at a ghost. Gideon, she breathed. She reached out. Don't, Rel screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. If you open that, you destroy the foundation of the Empire. Good, the queen said. She placed her palm on the metal. The reaction was instant. The grief steel didn't just glow. It exploded with light. A beam of pure white data shot straight up into the vaulted ceiling, piercing the scriptorum receivers above. The room didn't just see a memory. They felt it. It wasn't a memory of war. It wasn't a memory of pain. It was a memory of a garden. A secret garden hidden from the court. A young man, Gideon, was sitting on a bench. And sitting next to him, laughing, her head thrown back, was a young woman with violet eyes. A woman who was not yet a queen, but a princess, who had run away from her guards for an hour of freedom. The audio played crisp and clear, washing over the stunned silence of the court. They will never let us be Gideon, the young Malis said. I am to be queen. You are a healer. Then I'll heal, Gideon's voice replied, warm and strong. And you rule, and we keep the secret. But promise me one thing, May. Anything. Promise me that when you sit on that throne, you won't forget what it feels like to be small. The memory shifted. It showed Gideon holding a bundle, not the alien child from the clinic, but a human infant. He was holding it out to a cloaked figure in the shadows of the palace. Take him, Gideon whispered. If he stays here, the council will kill him to keep the bloodline pure. I will take him to the border. I will raise him. He will be safe. The courtroom was frozen. The air had turned to glass. Milton stared at the hologram. He stared at the infant in his father's arms. He looked at the queen. Queen Malis was weeping. She stood with her hand on the metal, the tears falling silently onto the obsidian table. She looked up through the light of the hologram and locked eyes with Milton. She didn't see a terrorist. She didn't see a vet's son. She saw the eyes of the man she had loved set in the face of the son she had given up to save. Rel fell to his knees. He knew. He had always known. That was why he had hunted Gideon. That was why he had tried to frame Milton. Not because of a riot, but because Milton Ward was the living proof that the Queen had a heart and a history that the Archons could not control. The hologram faded, leaving only the soft hum of the metal. Queen Malus lifted her hand. She turned to the court. She turned to Rel. "The verdict is reached," the Queen whispered, but her voice terrified every soul in the room. She looked at Milton. She bowed her head. And then, for the first time in recorded history, the Queen of the Galaxy fell to her knees before a human. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The silence in the Grand High Court was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of a collective breath held in check by terror and awe. Queen Malus knelt on the obsidian floor, her silver robes pooling around her like liquid mercury. Her hand was pressed flat against the dull, pitted surface of the grief steel metal. It did not look like a royal artifact. It looked like a piece of refuse. But as the Queen's skin touched the metal, the connection was not magnetic or electronic. It was biological. It was emotional. "Open," Queen Malus whispered. It was not a command. It was a plea. The metal screamed. It wasn't a noise that the ears could register. It was a psychic shockwave that blasted outward, bypassing the dampening fields, bypassing the shields of the Praetorian Guard, and driving straight into the neural cortex of every living being in the hall. The walls of the courtroom, the vaunted scriptorum receivers caught the signal. They amplified it. The reality of the room dissolved. The 3,000 nobles in the gallery gasped as one. They were no longer sitting in the Capitol. They were standing in a muddy field on the border of the galaxy. It was raining. The rain felt cold on their skin. The smell of wet earth and burning ozone was thick in their nostrils. "Stop it!" Archon Rel shrieked, clawing at his own temples. "Disconnect the feed, it is unauthorized." But there was no stopping it. Grief Steel does not negotiate. It only remembers. The projection was not a flat image. It was a 360-degree immersion. In the center of the muddy field stood Dr. Gideon Ward. He looked younger, his face unlined by the alcohol and sorrow that would claim his later years. He was kneeling in the mud, working frantically. Lying before him was not a human. It was a Krell soldier, the enemy. The Krell's chest was torn open, purple blood mixing with the rain. "Why?" the Krell soldier rasped in the memory, clutching Gideon's wrist. "I burned your crops, human." Why? Gideon didn't look up from his work. He was tying off a severed artery with steady, gentle hands. "Because the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike," Gideon said softly. "And I am just a doctor. I don't check ID cards at the door of death." In the courtroom, the nobles shifted uncomfortably. They had been taught that humans were savage, vengeful creatures. Yet here was a human saving the very monster that had tormented his colony, simply because the monster was in pain. The scene shifted. The rain turned to snow. A small room lit by a flickering fire. Gideon was there holding a mug of tea. Opposite him sat a figure cloaked in heavy wool, their face hidden in shadows. "You have to leave, Gideon," the figure said. The voice was distorted, warped by the damage to the metal over the years, but the anguish in it was clear. "The council knows. Rel knows." "Let them know," Gideon replied, staring into the fire. "We did nothing wrong. We loved." "Love is a crime when it dilutes the bloodline," the figure whispered. "They will kill him, Gideon. They will kill the boy to keep the throne pure." Gideon stood up. He walked to a crib in the corner of the room. He picked up a sleeping infant. The baby had a tuft of black hair and eyes that hadn't yet decided on a color. "They won't touch him," Gideon said. The steel in his voice was terrifying. "I will take him to the Outer Rim. I will raise him as a vet's son. He will grow up with dirt under his fingernails and calluses on his hands. He will be so ordinary that no one will ever look twice. And the truth? The figure asked. The truth stays here, Gideon said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the medal, the very same medal now resting on the judgment table. Lock it in this. Put your seal on it. And I swear to you, I will die before I open it. The figure in the memory stood up. A hand, pale and elegant, reached out and touched the medal. A flash of light, the royal biosignature sealed the medal. I swear it, the figure sobbed. Goodbye, my love. Goodbye, my son. The memory began to fracture. The scriptorium was fighting back. Rel was at his podium, his hands flying across the control surface, inputting override codes. Corrupt the file, Rel screamed to his technicians. Delete it. It is a fabrication, a deep fake. The image of Gideon flickered. Static ate away at the edges of the scene. The truth was being erased in real time. He is purging the buffer, Leona shouted. She was standing by the translation console, her hands hovering over the interface. He is trying to scrub the projection from the collective mind. Milton stood by the table, watching his father's face dissolve into digital noise. He felt a surge of panic. If the memory died now, it was just a story, a ghost story. Leona, Milton yelled. Don't translate it. Anchor it. Leona looked at him. She understood. In the traditions of the interpreter caste, there was a forbidden technique called the verbum aeternum, the eternal word. It was used to record the final testaments of dying kings. It took a fleeting moment of speech and burned it into the hardware of the scriptorium as an unalterable law. Leona closed her eyes. She didn't type. She placed her hands directly onto the data stream sensors. She opened her mind to the overwhelming flood of raw data. I designate this narrative as foundational law, Leona declared, her voice echoing with the unnatural resonance of the machine. Syntax locked. Edit privileges revoked. This is not a story. This is evidence. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the room. The flickering stopped. The static vanished. The image of Gideon holding the baby stabilized, becoming solid, brighter than reality itself. Rel's console sparked and died. He pounded his fists on the useless keys. No, you cannot lock a rogue file. It violates the protocol. I didn't use your protocol, Archon, Leona said, opening her eyes. They were glowing with a fierce violet light. I used the truth. The memory finished playing. Gideon walked out into the snow, carrying the child. The door closed. The screen went dark, but the silence remained. Milton looked around the room. He saw the faces of the alien nobility. They weren't looking at him with disgust anymore. They were looking at him with confusion and something that looked dangerously like respect. My father knew he would die, Milton said into the silence. His voice was not loud, but it filled the vast space. He knew Rel would come for him eventually. He could have run. He could have fought back. He could have raised an army. Milton walked over to the frozen image of Gideon. But he didn't, Milton continued. He taught me that if you fight fire with fire, all you get is ash. He chose to save the Krell who burned his crops. He chose to save the ethereal children. He chose to save me. He looked directly at Rel. That is how humans win, Rel. We don't win by making you lose. We win by making sure that when you look in the mirror, you can't stand what you see. Rel was trembling. His carefully constructed world of order and hierarchy was crumbling around him. He looked at the queen, who was still kneeling, her face buried in her hands. She is weak, Rel shouted, pointing an accusing finger at the monarch. She fell in love with a primitive. She polluted the royal line. I did what I had to do. I created the war to give us a common enemy. I purged the memories to keep us focused. Order is more important than truth. Queen Malis slowly lowered her hands. She stood up. Her face was wet with tears, but her expression was stone. She turned to Rel. She didn't scream. She didn't summon her guards. She asked a single question, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the chill of the void. "How many?" the queen asked. Rel blinked. "Your Majesty." "How many minds did you rewrite in my name?" she asked again. "How many fathers did you murder? How many children did you erase to keep my throne pure?" Rel straightened his spine. He looked at the gallery, trying to rally support, but the nobles looked away. "Millions," Rel spat the word out like a curse. "And I would do it again. Look at them. Look at the humans. They are chaotic. They are messy. They are a disease. I gave the galaxy structure, I gave you peace. And I used them as the mortar to build the walls." "You didn't build walls," Milton said, stepping forward. "You built a cage. And you forgot that even animals bite if you poke them long enough." Milton looked at the metal on the table. It was still glowing, connected to the scriptorium's core. He felt the hum of the machine. He realized something terrifying: the system was open. Leona's anchor had created a bridge. He could feel the entire database of the Empire at his fingertips. Every lie, every erased memory, every stolen life. "I can do it," Milton said softly. "I can overload the core. I can use the grief steel as a catalyst. I can burn the scriptorium to the ground. No more memory wipes. No more lies. The whole Empire goes blind." Rel's eyes went wide. "You wouldn't dare. You would destroy thousands of years of history. You would plunge us into the Dark Ages." "It might be an improvement," Milton said, his hand hovering over the metal. Leona stepped up beside him. She put her hand on his arm. Her touch was cool grounding. "Milton," she whispered, "if you burn it down, you burn the good memories too. You burn the memory of your father saving those children. You burn the memory of us." Milton looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of dying, but fear of losing herself again. "I'm scared, Milt," she admitted, her voice breaking. "My head is full of holes. Half my life is gone. If you destroy the machine, I'll never get it back. I don't know who I am." Milton looked at her deeply. "You are the woman who stood in front of a giant stone hammer for a stranger. You are the woman who hacked the High Court with a poem. That's who you are. But the past. Screw the past," Milton said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "If the pages are blank, Leona, then we write new ones. Together." He looked back at Rel. The Archon was waiting for the blow, waiting for the savage human to destroy civilization. Milton withdrew his hand from the metal. "I'm not going to burn it," Milton said. "That's what you would do." He tapped the table. "I'm unlocking it," he said. "Public access. Read-only mode. For everyone. Every citizen from the core to the rim gets to see exactly what you did. Every edit. Every murder. Every lie." Rel screamed as if he had been physically struck. "No privacy protocols, security clearance." "Denied," Milton said. "Welcome to the transparency era, Archon." The screens in the courtroom, and millions of screens across the galaxy, flooded with data. Not propaganda. Raw logs, lists of names, videos of raids. The truth, ugly and unvarnished, spilled out into the universe. The Praetorian guards looked at the screens. They saw orders signed by Rel commanding the execution of their own families in false flag operations. They saw the lies they had been fed. Slowly, the guards lowered their weapons. They turned not toward Milton, but toward Rel. "Take him!" Queen Malus commanded. Rel didn't fight. He looked at the crumbling facade of his life's work, looked at the humans he had despised, and simply sagged. Two guards, one Krell, one ethereal, dragged him away. He didn't look like a monster anymore. He looked like a small, petty bureaucrat who had mistaken control for leadership. The room was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the cooling metal. Queen Malus stood alone by the table. She looked at the projection of the cloaked woman one last time before it faded. Then she turned to Milton. She looked at his face. She studied the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. "The twist," Milton said softly, "is a bit cliché, isn't it, the hidden prince? The secret heir." "Is it?" the Queen asked. Her voice was trembling. "Yeah," Milton shrugged. "Except for one thing. I don't want it," the Queen blinked. "You are the legitimate heir to the throne of stars. You could rule." "I'm a vet's son," Milton said. "I fix things that are broken. I don't sit on chairs and tell people what to do. Besides, I have a feeling the pay is terrible." He reached out and picked up the medal. He pinned it back onto his dirty jacket. "My dad didn't die so I could become a statue, Your Majesty. He died so I could be a man." Queen Malis looked at him. For a moment, the mask of royalty slipped completely. She looked like a mother who wanted desperately to hug her child, but knew that the chasm of 20 years and a million lies was too wide to cross in a single step. So she did the only thing she could do. She stepped back. She gathered her silver robes, and she bowed. It was not the polite nod of a monarch to a subject. It was a deep, formal bow. Her knees touched the obsidian floor. Her forehead touched the ground. The entire court gasped. The Queen was bowing to a human. "Not for the blood," the Queen said, her voice muffled by the floor, but audible to the entire universe. "But for the choice. You had the power to destroy us, and you chose mercy. You are more worthy of this crown than I ever was." The courtiers, seeing their queen, hesitated. Then slowly, one by one, they knelt. The towering Krell generals, the ethereal scribes, the stony bureaucrats, even Bailiff Thorne. They bowed to the man in the dirty jacket. Milton stood there uncomfortable, shifting his weight. He looked at Leona. "This is weird," he whispered. "Can we go?" Leona smiled. It was a radiant, beautiful smile that reached her violet eyes. "Yes. I think the trial is over." Milton offered her his arm. "Dinner. I know a place that serves terrible synthesized noodles, but the owner doesn't try to erase your brain." "That sounds acceptable," Leona said, taking his arm. They turned and walked out of the Grand High Court. They walked past the bowing nobles, past the stunned guards, past the weeping queen who remained on her knees. They walked out into the bright, artificial sunlight of the capital. Milton didn't look back. He didn't look at the palace that was his birthright. He looked at Leona. He looked at the sky. "So," Milton said, taking a deep breath of air that finally tasted free. "What do we do now?" Leona looked at the datapad she had swiped from the console, the one containing the backups of her own file, encrypted but recoverable. "We go home," Leona said, "and we start translating." "Translating what everything," she said. "We make sure the story is told right this time." Milton patted the grief steel metal on his chest. It was warm, a steady, comforting heat. "Sounds like a plan," he said. They walked into the crowd, two small figures in a massive, ancient city. Behind them, the empire was changing. The statues were being pulled down. The history books were being rewritten. But Milton Ward didn't care about history anymore. He had a future to write. And as they disappeared into the throng of the streets, the Queen finally stood up, wiped her eyes, and began the hard, necessary work of being human.